havoc in our life because we're always trying to solve the issue of I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not young enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not smart enough. And a lot of times that insecurity is rooted in the trauma that we had, whether it was bullying as a kid, whether it was a divorce in our family, our parents, abuse, trauma, whatever it is. Throughout our life, hopefully we're growing, gaining maturity, understanding. We reinterpret our childhood with the knowledge that we have as an adult.
The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the producer and not necessarily those of WKTV Community Media.
Hello, West Michigan. This is Grand Tap Media Business TV. My name is Pamela Keim, your host. The spirit of the show is to introduce West Michigan to all the businesses, nonprofits, individuals that can help us thrive in our lives. We have a very special guest for you today. She is a global communicator. She is a CEO. She is an author, and her current book, The Freedom Challenge, 60 Days to Untie the Cords That Bind You. And I want to welcome to the show, Dawn Damon.
Thank you, Pamela. It's great to be here.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I know that you are the CEO of BraveHearted Woman. Yes. That's how I was introduced to you. I just interviewed a dear friend of yours, Michelle Steffes.
Yes, Michelle.
Yes.
Shout out to Michelle.
And you also, she mentioned that you are a BraveHearted mentor. I want to share with West Michigan what we have today. I wanted you to have on the show because I think there's a lot of people since COVID that are kind of still suffering from PTSD. They don't know where to go. Everything is changing rather quickly.
Yes.
And I want you to share who you are, how you got into this, and about all these books that you have written that I was able to go through. I'm like, oh my goodness, you have quite the story.
Well, yes, thank you. I do. I have a story. We all have a story, right? And sometimes our story is very common, but it's unique to us. I am a survivor of childhood trauma, and I grew up just feeling like there was always just something that I needed to perform, to excel, to reach, to grow, to somehow overturn the shame and just the low self-esteem that I struggled with.
Right.
And I did get that breakthrough in my mid-20s and early 30s, and I continue. We're all in process, making progress, hopefully all the time. But I did get that breakthrough, but I didn't write my first book until I was 50 years old. And so I just gave away my age a little bit.
Well, I mean, all of these, your first 3 books is about the trauma that you went through and living with someone with trauma, and the success you have today is just amazing. But when you say that, I'm just going to go out and ask, don't you feel we all, when we go through something traumatic like that, that there's got to be something, our suffering's got to lead to something good?
Yeah, I love how you're saying that. I think that's exactly true, because if it's not redeemed, if we don't use it for some good, then it's like we sit in that toxicity. Right. We sit in that poison, and all it does then is wreaks havoc in our life because we're always trying to solve the issue of I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not young enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not smart enough. And a lot of times that insecurity is rooted in the trauma that we had, whether it was bullying as a kid, whether it was a divorce in our family, our parents, abuse, trauma, whatever it is. Throughout our life, hopefully we're growing, gaining maturity, understanding. We reinterpret our childhood with the knowledge that we have as an adult. We go back and we make sense of it. Sometimes that works for our good, and sometimes we go, wow, no wonder I'm so messed up.
Well, and I think all of us feel that way, but in your books, let's talk about, your first 3 books are about. Do you want to share a little bit what brought you to, bringing this out? Because it's something that a lot of people feel shame. I know people that have been abused and they don't want to talk about it, especially. Do you want to go into any?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Let's talk about this, because there's other people out there that are probably feeling the same, like, I don't want people to know. And maybe they have family members they don't want the information out. Does that make sense?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, family secrets are entrenched. It's don't tell, don't talk, pretend, keep the secret, keep on going. Family issues are rarely brought out into the open, but as a result, we do sometimes stay in our sickness. So I, as a coach today, and I was in the pastoral ministry for many years, I'm still an ordained minister, but I can tell you that even the most successful women, whether they're doctors, entrepreneurs, PhDs, teachers in the education, fashion industry, doesn't matter. I've had all kinds of clients, but many of which come to me because they still have this secret. I was abused as a child. I've never overcome it. I haven't resolved it. It's brought lots of pain and misery in my marriage situation. I hate sex. I don't want to be touched. And so I began to write the book because that was my story. I was growing in success as an individual and in the calling that God had on my life, but there was this area that was a deep wound, and it was my childhood story. And it affected my marriage. Even though I was married for 28 years,
Right.
my husband really became the second victim of my childhood abuse because he paid the price for the abuser.
Did he know?
He knew, and I told him, but I didn't even know how it impacted me. I didn't even know until all of a sudden you're living in the soup and it's like, don't touch me like that. Why did you say that? I feel controlled. You know, I was getting triggered left and right, and I didn't know. It really wasn't him, although he had his stuff. I had my stuff, but it was rooted back there. So the reason why I wrote my first book, and it's called When the Woman You Love Has Been Abused, A Husband's Guide to Helping His Wife Overcome Childhood Abuse.
Wouldn't you say that you hear from other stories from the husband? I mean, and we're going to cover your newest book, and that's helping women, you know, reach their, you know, women, or that's your target market, potential and what binds them. But there's always that backstory of why people do what they're doing. And when I saw the book on the woman that, you know, married the gentleman, your husband,
for the husband,
right, dealing with what you went through and making. Sometimes we put it, like you said, we put it on them. It's all, you know, because they're just normal sexual relation when you get married. Right? You're supposed to be having the time of your life, especially when you first get married. It's like, oh, you're in the honeymoon, everything. And him having to feel what? Guilt? I mean, what did he start to notice, or? Well,
you know, I'm going to divert just for a moment. You had Michelle Steffes on, and I'm sure that she talked about the brain and the neuroscience that we have now. And just think about this, Pamela. We know that what fires together wires together. So there's this thought in your brain. It's not just your thinking, but it's a neurobiological reality that when a girl is being, or a boy, 1 in 6 young boys are being sexually abused, growing number. But think about it. I was being molested and abused, and what was firing together was sexuality and pain, trauma, sexuality and fear, anger, hatred. What wires together, you know, what fires together wires together. So I don't know that, but now I'm in a marriage situation and I'm being triggered because maybe I felt coerced or I didn't like, you know, and I didn't even know. I loved my husband loved me. We were two young kids in love. And I would feel guilty, like, why am I angry right now? Why am I because the most shameful, pitiful, disgusting, embarrassing event in my life happened in this moment. And my brain hadn't forgotten it. I needed to renew my mind and break up that connection that had happened and had formed together. So I wanted a husband to know, and I didn't even know it, as I'm saying, I really didn't. I had one husband I was coaching, and he said, I'm so frustrated. My wife won't tell me her story, and she won't tell me why. And I said, time out just for a moment. I said, she's not even telling herself why. She doesn't even know her story. Give her time. Let her know this is a safe place. If she feels safe and she's not triggered and feeling like she's in vigilant stress and trauma, her story will probably come back to her, but not as long as she feels threatened.
So what brought you to the point where, you know, I need to deal with this? Did something happen? Did you go through a depression? What was the symptoms that, like a lot of people suffer?
You're right
it's
on.
Like they hit a wall and it's like, I can't get over this.
That was it. My body was advocating for me because I wanted to just keep on going and ignore it and forget it. And my body was saying, no, you have trauma, you have to deal with this. And so I had pains and aches. I had joint problems, I had ulcers, I had stomach problems, and I kept pressing through. I had my gallbladder taken out when I was like 24. I had my appendix removed. Everything was going on. And then I kept muscling through because I'm gritty. I'm going to keep going, you know. You're not going to defeat me, anybody. And I learned that. I muscled up, you know, in abuse. But then the depression and the anxiety hit, and that knocked me right on my...
What did that look like?
Oh my goodness, it looked like me waking up one morning like a deer in headlights. Like I just woke up and my heart was racing and I was like, what's wrong with me? Something's wrong. Something feels wrong, something feels off. I had to teach Bible study that day. I had about 200 women coming to a Bible study. I did okay. I got done with it and I was in a coaching session after, and the girl was pouring her heart out to me, and she sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher. All I could think of was,
I know what that
"Shut
feels
up.
like, yeah.
I couldn't, and finally I just looked at her and I said, I'm so sorry, I'm not feeling well. I went home, and that day, I call it Black Tuesday, that day turns out would be the first day of 156 days just like it, of the darkest, gloomiest, depression, panic attacks, anxiety, massive weight loss on the couch. And I had tried to get on some medication, but I didn't like it and it felt weird, so I got off. So I didn't have anything for 5 to 6 months. And then death wish started. And I loved my life. I didn't want to kill myself, but I just had to be done. I was suffering. I could not take one more day.
Did your husband know that this was?
Yeah, he at that time, everybody knew. My kids knew. Everybody was taking care of me. I went from being a mover and a shaker and running and blowing and going to completely on the couch, doors locked, shades down, in a blanket, kids taking care of me, couldn't drive, couldn't go anywhere, could do nothing. And my husband was calling area hospitals to see what do I do. And I made a phone call to a psychiatrist friend that I knew, and he said, do you have any of that medicine they tried to put you on? And I said, yeah. And he goes, I want you to, and I go, oh, I hate it. And he goes, no. I know how to get you on, and I'll get you off. And we're going to sneak up on your body. So he had me break it in half again and take a little bit, and then take a little bit more next day. And
what did that do for you?
in 3 weeks, I was back to normal.
Are you kidding?
No. In 3 weeks, I had my life back. I was like, I'm back. So trauma is a biological experience as well as emotional, as well as spiritual. And my brain was just depleted. My abuse happened in my bedroom at night.
How old were you when it started?
I don't know.
You don't remember?
Don't remember.
So when you have this anxiety, I mean, they always ask you, what age are you?
Yeah.
Because there is a quote out there that I always use, you're every age you've ever been.
Yep.
And so you take it every experience, which makes sense, right?
Yes.
But you remember when you're back 8 years old or whatever. So what happened in the 3 weeks? Did you go to therapy? How did you get through
I
the
had been
trauma?
going to therapy all along. You know, my husband or one of my friends would bring me there, and I was very resistant because I said, I already know what my issues are. You know, I used to say, why drag the river if you've already found the body? I don't need to drag it all up. I know what happened. But they were like, well, yeah, but you don't. You know what happened. You don't know what it did to you. The lies that I began to believe, the vigilant stress that I was in night after night after night, the fear that it provoked, the shame that I was covered in.
The lack of trust.
The lack of trust, the brokenness.
That boundary that we all see in children that are in our care, how much they trust us, how much they believe. I mean, that's probably the hardest thing, is when you see children at that age, whatever age you were, let's say you're under 10, and they just blindly follow you.
Absolutely.
Because they trust you.
And this was my father, and I adored my father. And so I just pretended that it didn't happen. I would freeze. I think I'm somewhere between the age of 10 up until 17 is my last memory. And
10, 17? Did you actually, I mean, I know you feel that may be, did you just try to stop it? Did you tell your mother? How did that,
None of it.
what do
None
you
of
do
it.
with that information?
You feel abandoned because you have a secret you can't tell anyone. And so you can't really get close to anyone because what if it comes out? What if they suspect? So it was very lonely, and yet...
What was your biggest fear then, if it came out? The stop, or were we afraid they were going to take you out of the home?
Well,
what was
see,
it?
This is where it gets very convoluted. My biggest fear is my dad would get in trouble. My parents
Yeah.
would divorce. I would
Yeah.
lose my family. It'd be my fault.
Everybody hate me.
And this is not a popular thing to say. I love my dad. My dad is with the Lord now. My dad begged for forgiveness and went through healing and therapy and asked for forgiveness. And my dad was an amazing person. And how can I say that? But he was also very sick and very broken. So it was like I had Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Right.
And so I pretended that I didn't know that. I intentionally blocked it out, regularly blocked it out. And
do you think your mother's, what was your mother's
my mom
role?
knows today.
Right. But did she look back now and see red flags that she ignored? Because that's usually what gets us into trouble. We ignore things. It's like you have a weird feeling.
I can't answer that completely. She tells me that she had no idea, and I believe that because she was a very busy woman. She was an executive woman. She's a very smart woman and accomplished, and she was gone a lot. My mom and dad owned their own advertising agency, and so they were busy. They were in the fast lane, and so there was not a lot of attunement in terms of, like, I look at my daughters as mothers, and they're amazing mothers, and so is my son. He's an amazing father. But I look at my daughters, and I'm like, you are so attuned to your children. Like, you get them, you watch them, you're there for them, you take them places. That is not the generation that we grew up in. We grew up in kids are to be seen and not heard.
Right.
And it wasn't the same. And so I believe it would be more difficult today for that scenario to take place. I would hope and pray it is.
Well, they talk about it more in schools, and I'm not sure if they do in churches.
Yes,
if
we do.
they okay, so that subject is brought up, and so people, maybe they would start to begin to realize this is not right.
So much more awareness and
Right.
discussion and conversation around it, which I'm so thankful. So that is why I wrote the books.
So you wrote the book on
Yeah.
that one, and now what can you share with us? Once you started speaking out, obviously with the book, right? Was
Yes.
your dad alive when the book came out?
He was not. My
Okay.
dad was gone.
What
Yeah.
about your lovely cover?
Yeah,
but
thank you.
What about your
Kriegel Publications right here in Grand Rapids. So
Yes.
thank you, Kriegel.
Yeah, and I mean, what did your mother say when the book came out? What did you have
Well,
siblings?
we had conversations before that. So we had family meetings.
Okay.
My dad had confessed and talked to all of us. I don't know my sister's stories, so I don't
Right.
share them. But
Correct.
my mom found out. My mom wept bitterly, asked for forgiveness. My mom and dad ended in divorce, and that was a primary source of it. But also my dad's just his battles, his struggles. And my mom remarried an amazing guy, beautiful guy. And then I asked permission to the family, is it okay if I tell this story? I don't want to, I need to have it redeemed. It needs to make sense.
Right.
I'm not going to my grave carrying a secret. I don't roll that way. I don't need to tell the world everything, but there's too many people that I was given the opportunity to speak to, help, reach out, marriages, women, children, and I was being asked all the time once my story kind of began to trickle out there for people, and then I wanted to talk about it on platform, and then I was asked to write about it. So I just felt like the wealth was not in keeping the secret. The beauty and the redemption would be in sharing it in an integrous way.
Right, and you are like I didn't read all of your accolades here. Or your thing
okay.
being a pastor, you're an influencer, you're a global communicator, podcaster, and coach, and a best-selling author, as you can see with all these books here. But when you put your podcast out and it's global, that are in situations that do you get that?
Yeah, we get that all the time.
And
yeah,
what would
and I
you
get from the books, the reading public that will get my books, whether they're from the UK or Canada or United States, I get emails, and we want to have that. And I've in fact coached a few men who have read my book and asked and hired me and wanted to know if I would be willing to help them and speak with them and then minister to their wife. So it's opened a great door. I do get that on the podcast. Now my podcast, I don't specifically speak about it, but I share it all the time as just common fact, like I'll say, and you all know my story, and if you don't, you can read about it. But
in the books, yeah, okay, so, yeah, and we're gonna talk about part 2 about your podcast. So what is, so did you grow up in West Michigan?
I did. I grew up in Grand Rapids.
Okay.
And right here.
I know you're in Rockford right now, but I mean,
Yes.
just in Grand Rapids. If you
Southeast side of Grand Rapids by Woodland Mall.
And so what? So tell us anything. What do you on this one? You know, when a woman is abused, was you when the woman? What would you like to get people who pick up this book, or maybe they're out there right now suffering, as a lot of people are, hiding this stuff. And it could be just they live with an alcoholic father that made them feel unsafe. And then that's the kind of I know people that grew up that way.
Yes.
You know, what signs, people that like me, I was a mother, I had kids. I didn't even realize that one of my classmates were being sexually abused.
Yeah.
But you know the interesting thing, and I shared this with my husband after I reconnected to her like 30, 40 years later, right? It must have been about 10 years ago we reconnected. She was my dear friend. But there was something strange when I went into the home and I couldn't put my plate, I could not put my finger on it. I was just a child. We grew up as, in grade school. And then the way her dad, and I remember this distinctly, the way her dad would discipline her was strange. Like if he kicked her in her private parts.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, I'm a kid going, and it was just these little things that I would go home and feel uncomfortable, but whatever.
Right, and that's abusive right in itself.
Right.
Kicking someone in their private parts, violating the most intimate parts of their body is unacceptable and inappropriate. So that might have been what her trauma was right there and then, but it sounds like it was more, but we don't know. It could be the person sitting right next to us on the pew. It could be the perpetrator could be sitting right next to us on the pew. And so that is why, like we talked about, it's good to have this conversation and bring awareness and less possibility of it happening when we keep our eyes open and we keep our mouth open. We keep speaking about it, talking about it, letting people know this does happen. I had a girlfriend, she became a friend, she was a client that told me she was being abused at the dinner table. And they would have devotions, and then the dad would have, come sit on my lap, and he'd sit on her lap,
Kids know, right, when they're feeling that way. And we only have a few minutes left before we go talking about your current book and your podcast and what this. I wanted to get West Michigan to know your backstory. So when they did see you, it's like, you know what, I know where you come from. But what can you leave us with today? I'm going to go. I know you gave me some. I had some questions. So I make sure that I covered all that on the and which is probably everything we did. I didn't want to ask you, but I do want to share because I know that a lot of people are suffering, and maybe they felt like, did you want to tell? Did you want somebody to comfort you, and did you want to tell? And there's probably people out there that do want to tell.
Yes, eventually I wanted to. Not at first. I was too embarrassed. It was really embarrassing, so I didn't want to tell anyone. Because I thought somehow I was telling on me, it was my fault. I should have said no. Why didn't I say no? Why didn't I stop it? But maybe just to leave our listeners today with something is that God wants wholeness in our whole life.
Right.
So if we're successful in relationships or successful in our career, or we earn a lot of money, or we're an entrepreneur, or we have the greatest body in the world, but if we are harboring a secret, something going on in our life, be sure and know that it's active. You might not be aware of it, but it's actively creating decay, trauma, and pain inside of you. So if you want to truly be successful, truly have healing and wholeness, don't be afraid to talk to someone. Find a coach, find a mentor, find a pastor, someone you trust, someone who's aware of these issues so that you don't get more condemnation heaped on you.
Right.
And
a lot of people don't. I mean, there's so many things out there right now to help you with that. But the one thing I want to end with is that you did reconcile with your father.
I did.
And he was very remorseful, right?
Yes,
throughout
he was.
his when you did that. And and he's not with you anymore, so you can speak on that. But you know, there is reconciliation with the if it's the parent, right? Abuser. I wouldn't say people in the public that might be abusing. Maybe a school teacher, that never happens. But when it comes to you only have your mom and your dad. You don't have any other.
And my dad had become a changed man. So had he still been in his toxicity, I always drew boundaries. My children were never allowed around him. And I didn't feel that reconciliation meant that I had to restore a relationship in person, and was about to draw those boundaries when God did get a hold of him and give him a breakthrough. He was an alcoholic. He became sober. Those things happened for him, and that's when I felt it was safe to go ahead and allow my children to meet him and know who he was. And
right.
And
this is an incredible story. I don't know that everybody gets that blessing of reconciliation, and because some people don't feel remorse, they don't want to talk about it. They call you a liar. They're sure there's stories, and then of course the other family feeling, members feeling the shame. Isn't the public, we're a broken family. You know, I'm trying, you know, they're always thinking, what's this going to, how is this going to affect me?
Yes.
And then maybe they weren't the one that was abused. Then all of a sudden, well, you brought this out, because I get that a lot too, where people are like, yeah, my sister, you know, sister's family, my brother especially, because they have a good relationship with the abuser.
Yes.
And that's hard. It's the whole family dynamics. It just makes it so difficult.
It's complex on many levels, isn't it? Yeah.
And do you discuss that in all your in the books that they can get for this
when
issue?
to tell, how to tell, if they should tell, when to restore, how to set boundaries, but mostly, you know, symptoms, how to heal, how to help understand what you've experienced, understand you're not alone, it's common. You might think you're just a freak and I'm the only one, and then you hear it and you're going, oh my goodness, that's me, that's me, that's me. Oh, I'm not flawed, I'm not damaged. That's the nature of what happened to me. And so it's very freeing in those ways to find out there's hope.
Okay. Well, we're going to be wrapping up this part one interview, and I want you to look into that camera there and tell people how to get your where they can find your books.
Okay.
And how they can reach you if they want you to come and speak on this. It would be great. And share their story. Maybe they're on their podcast to share about overcoming abuse.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
Well, first of all, you can find all of my books on Amazon. And if you want to go to amazon.com/author/Dawn Scott Damon, but otherwise just put in Dawn Damon, you'll find them. Send me an email at dawn@dawnscottdamon.com. And for resources and free gifts and downloads, go to braveheartedwoman.com.
All right, so thank you so much, Dawn, for being here today.
Thank you.
This is Pamela Keim from GRTV Media, and we will see you next week for part 2 with Dawn Damon, and she is going to be talking about two or three books she has out that's going to help you overcome some of the things that bind you. Have a great day, everyone.